Alicia Brooks was only 20 when she believed she could change lives, simply by teaching children to read and write their names. She walked into a prestigious Boston school full of hope, but was met with silence, rejection, and quiet cruelty. Students mocked her, parents protested, and one moment of discipline turned into a lawsuit that cost her everything. They thought her dream was over. But far away in a forgotten village, she started again and changed more lives than ever before. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. The sun rose slowly over Redwood Valley, Mississippi, casting a soft amber light across dusty roads and quiet wooden homes. The morning air was warm and still, broken only by the distant hum of insects and the occasional creak of an old porch. It was a place where time didn't rush. It simply moved forward, one quiet day at a time. Alicia Brooks had grown up in that stillness. At 20 years old, Alicia was tall and slender, her posture naturally upright as if she carried an invisible sense of responsibility. Her deep brown skin held a soft glow under the southern sun, and her face, though young, carried a calm seriousness shaped by years of quiet observation. Her dark brown eyes were steady and thoughtful, often studying people more than speaking to them. Her tightly coiled black hair was usually tied back in a neat, low bun, practical and unadorned. She dressed simply, faded jeans, plain cotton shirts, and worn sneakers, but there was a quiet dignity in everything she wore. She had never been the loudest person in a room, but she was always the one who noticed. Redwood Valley was a place where opportunities were rare and education was often secondary to survival. Many families worked long hours in fields, garages, or small roadside shops. Children grew up quickly here, learning responsibilities before they learned to dream, and many never learned to read. Alicia had seen it long before she understood it. The memory that stayed with her most clearly began on a warm afternoon when she was just 7 years old. The sun had been high, the air thick with heat, and the road stretching out in front of her shimmered slightly. That was where she saw Ethan. Ethan Carter was a small boy, about her age, with a slim frame and slightly hunched posture as if he were trying to make himself invisible. His skin was a warm, deep brown, and his large round eyes held a constant mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. His hair was short and tightly curled, often uneven as if cut at home. He wore oversized clothes, shirts that hung loosely over his shoulders and pants that were always a little too long. He stood in front of a wooden sign near the road, staring at it with intense concentration. Alicia approached slowly. "What does it say?" she asked. Ethan didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, he shook his head. "I don't know," he said. His voice was soft, almost hesitant. "I can't read it." Alicia looked at the sign. It wasn't complicated, but to Ethan, it might as well have been written in another language. "Do you want me to tell you?" she asked. He nodded. As she read the words aloud, Ethan listened carefully, as if trying to memorize not just the meaning, but the feeling of understanding. "Can you show me how to read it?" he asked. That question stayed with her. Not because it was unusual, but because it wasn't. There were many like Ethan, children who didn't ask questions in class because they didn't know where to begin. Children who avoided reading out loud. Children who signed papers with a simple mark because they didn't know how to write their names. And somehow in Redwood Valley that had become normal. But Alicia could never accept it. The person who understood that feeling better than anyone was her grandmother. Grandma Lillian Brooks was 78 years old, short and slightly bent from decades of physical work. Her skin was deep brown, lined with the soft wrinkles that told stories of endurance rather than age. Her silver-gray hair was always pulled into a low bun, neat and practical. Her eyes, warm, patient, and deeply kind, were the first thing people noticed about her. She had a way of speaking that made even the simplest words feel important. But there was one thing she carried quietly she could not read. One evening, as the sky turned a deep orange and the shadows stretched long across the wooden porch, Alicia sat beside her. "Grandma," Alicia said gently. Why didn't you ever learn? Lillian smiled faintly, her hands resting in her lap. Life didn't give me the time, she replied. And after a while, you start believing it's too late. Alicia shook her head. It's never too late. Lillian looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing something more than just her granddaughter. If I could learn anything now, she said softly, I'd learn to write my name. Alicia blinked. Just your name? Her grandmother nodded. So no one else has to speak for me. Those words settled deep into Alicia's heart. Then Lillian reached out, placing her hand gently over Alicia's. One day, she said, her voice steady but filled with quiet hope, you're going to teach people how to write theirs. That moment became something permanent. A dream, not loud, not impossible, but meaningful. There was another person who believed in Alicia long before she believed in herself. Marcus Hill. Marcus was 22, broad-shouldered and strong, his build shaped by years of working with engines and heavy tools. His hands were rough, often stained with oil that never seemed to wash away completely. His skin was a rich brown, and his face carried a calm seriousness, softened by eyes that reflected quiet loyalty. His hair was cut short and practical, and his movements were steady, never rushed. He worked at a small auto repair shop at the edge of town, a place filled with the smell of grease and metal. Marcus had left school early, not because he wanted to, because he had to. You're not staying here forever, he told Alicia one afternoon, leaning against the open hood of a car. Alicia crossed her arms lightly. And you are. Marcus shrugged. Someone has to fix things around here, he said. Then he looked at her. But you're meant for something else. Alicia hesitated. What if I leave and nothing changes? Marcus smiled slightly. Then you come back, he said, and change it yourself. Years passed, and Alicia worked harder than anyone around her. While others studied just enough to pass, she studied with purpose. Every book she read, every lesson she learned, it all felt like something she would carry back home. She didn't just want to succeed. She wanted to make a difference. When the acceptance letter arrived, it came quietly. A thin envelope. Simple. But everything changed the moment she opened it. Brighton Academy, Boston. Full-time teaching position. Alicia read the letter twice, then a third time. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what it meant. This was more than an opportunity. It was a door. That night she sat again on the porch with Grandma Lillian. This time Alicia held a pencil in her grandmother's hand. Let's try, she said softly. Slowly, carefully, she guided her. Nen. The letters were uneven, shaky, but real. Lillian stared at the paper for a long moment, then her lips trembled slightly as she smiled. I wrote it, she whispered. Alicia nodded, her voice quiet. Yes, you did. The next morning, the sun rose as it always had over Redwood Valley. But for Alicia Brooks, everything was different. She stood at the edge of the road, a small suitcase in her hand, the bus waiting. Marcus stood nearby, arms crossed, giving a short nod. You'll be back, he said. Alicia smiled. I know. Grandma Lillian stood on the porch, holding the piece of paper with her name written on it. Alicia looked at her one last time. Then she stepped onto the bus. As it pulled away, Redwood Valley slowly faded behind her. Ahead was Boston. A new world, a new challenge, and the beginning of something she believed in with everything she had. Alicia Brooks was going to teach, and somehow she believed that was enough to change everything. The days that followed did not explode into chaos. They tightened. What Alicia Brooks faced inside Brighton Academy was not loud rebellion, but something far more exhausting. A steady, calculated resistance that seemed to grow sharper with each passing morning. The weather outside had turned colder. The Boston sky often covered in a dull gray that matched the tone of her days. Wind rattled against the classroom windows as if echoing the tension inside. Alicia arrived early every day. She stood at the door, greeting each student as they walked in. "Good morning." Some walked past her as if she weren't there. Some looked at her briefly, then away. A few smirked. But she didn't stop, because giving up that small effort felt like giving up everything. Inside the classroom, she tried new methods. Group activities, reading exercises, open discussions. She adapted, adjusted, and refined her teaching constantly. On paper, everything she was doing was correct. In reality, nothing was working. Lucas Bennett had become the center of it. He didn't shout. He didn't throw things. He didn't break rules in obvious ways. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching Alicia with a quiet defiance that influenced the rest of the class. When she asked questions, he would answer just enough to sound dismissive. When she gave instructions, he would follow them. Slowly, reluctantly, making sure others noticed. It wasn't disruption. It was control. And others followed. Claire Donovan led in a different way. Where Lucas was quiet resistance, Claire was subtle ridicule. She would whisper comments just loud enough for nearby students to hear, her lips barely moving. Her tone calm but cutting. Her posture remained perfect. Her work always neat, which made her behavior harder to confront. Alicia saw it, but proving it was something else. Outside the classroom, the distance from her colleagues had only grown. One afternoon, Alicia entered the teacher's lounge again, hoping, perhaps foolishly, that something might change. It hadn't. At a table near the window sat Mr. Daniel Pierce, a history teacher in his early 40s. He was tall, slightly overweight, with thinning brown hair and a habit of adjusting his glasses when uncomfortable. His voice, when he spoke, carried a polite tone, but there was always something guarded behind it, like a man who had learned to stay neutral in order to survive in a structured environment. Alicia approached carefully. "Good afternoon." Mr. Pierce glanced up, hesitated for half a second, then nodded. "Afternoon." He returned to his papers. That was all. Nearby, 2 other teachers lowered their voices as she walked past. Not silent, but quieter. Alicia poured herself coffee again. This time she didn't wait. She left. Emily Carter watched it happen. She stood near the doorway, her notebook held loosely in her hands. There was a tension in her expression, something between discomfort and restraint. Emily had always been the kind of person who noticed things others ignored. She had grown up in a quiet household where conflict was avoided, not confronted, and that habit had followed her into adulthood. But this was different. This wasn't misunderstanding, this was deliberate. That evening, Emily sat at her desk long after the other teachers had left. She opened her notebook, flipping through pages filled with observations, not just lesson plans, but small notes about students' behaviors, patterns. Her pen hovered for a moment. Then she wrote one line. Something isn't right. Across town, in a large, well-maintained suburban house, Lucas Bennett sat at the dining table, staring down at his unfinished homework. The house was immaculate. Clean lines, polished surfaces, everything in its place. It reflected the man who stood at the head of the table, Richard Bennett, Lucas's father. Richard was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 40s with sharp features and a commanding presence. His dark suit was always perfectly pressed, his posture straight, his tone controlled. He worked as a corporate executive, a man used to authority, to order, to things being done his way. His blue eyes were cold, not out of cruelty, but out of habit. A man who had learned to value control over connection. "Why is this incomplete?" Richard asked, his voice even but firm. Lucas shrugged slightly. "It's not important." Richard's expression tightened. "Everything you do is important," he replied, "and you will not fall behind because of distractions." Lucas didn't respond, but his jaw clenched slightly. "Who is your teacher?" Richard continued. Lucas hesitated. "Miss Brooks." A pause, subtle but present. Richard leaned back slightly, his gaze narrowing just enough to signal disapproval. "I expect better results," he said, "from both of you." The message was clear. Lucas looked down again. Something in his expression shifted. Not rebellion, not confidence. Pressure. Back in the classroom, Alicia felt the change before she saw it. The atmosphere had grown sharper, more coordinated. One morning, as she turned to write on the board, a quiet snicker spread across the room. She paused, sensing it. When she turned back, everything looked normal. Too normal. She continued the lesson. Minutes later, as she sat down at her desk to review a student's work, something felt wrong. There was a slight stick, then resistance. Alicia froze. Slowly, she tried to stand. The chair didn't move with her. Laughter broke out, not loud, but enough. Her hand gripped the edge of the desk as she carefully freed herself, the realization settling in instantly. Glue. Someone had covered the chair. Her heart pounded, not from embarrassment alone, but from something deeper. This wasn't random. This was planned. She looked up. Lucas didn't laugh. He just watched. Claire covered her mouth, pretending to hide a smile. Alicia took a slow breath. "Who did this?" she asked, her voice steady but firm. Silence. No one spoke. No one moved. She scanned the room. No answers. Later that same day, it happened again. As she stepped near the front of the classroom, a small bucket tipped from above the door. Water spilling down across her shoulders, soaking her clothes instantly. This time the laughter was louder, more confident. Alicia stood there, water dripping from her sleeves, her hair slightly undone from the sudden movement. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes, not out of weakness, out of control. When she opened them again, something had changed. "Enough," she said. The room quieted. Not because they respected her, because they hadn't expected that tone. Her gaze moved directly to Lucas. "Stand up?" He didn't move immediately. Then, slowly he did. "You will remain standing for the rest of the class," Alicia continued, "and you will explain why this behavior is unacceptable." Lucas's expression hardened. "I didn't do anything." Alicia didn't raise her voice. "But you're responsible for this classroom," she said. "And right now you're part of the problem." The room went still. For the first time, the balance had shifted. Slightly, but noticeably. Lucas remained standing. And for the rest of the lesson, no one laughed. By the second week, Brighton Academy no longer felt unfamiliar to Alicia Brooks. It felt calculated. The city outside had turned colder. The mornings wrapped in a pale gray fog that clung to the streets and lingered in the air like something unspoken. The wind moved sharply between buildings, and the trees lining the school courtyard had begun to shed their leaves, leaving behind thin, bare branches that scratched softly against the windows. Inside the classroom, something had changed. It was no longer just distance. It was intent. Alicia noticed it in the way students looked at each other before she spoke, in the quiet signals passed between desks, in the timing of their reactions. The resistance had become coordinated, subtle but deliberate, and it was growing. She stood at the front of the classroom, writing a sentence on the board, her handwriting steady despite the tension she could feel behind her. "Today we're going to—" A soft laugh interrupted her, then another. Alicia paused. She turned slowly. The board behind her had changed. Across the clean white surface, written in uneven, bold strokes, were words that had not been there moments ago. Mocking words, distorted versions of her name, exaggerations of her voice. The class didn't erupt into laughter, but enough of them did. Enough for it to matter. Alicia stared at the board for a brief second. Her expression didn't break. She reached for the eraser and wiped it clean. "Open your books," she said. Her voice didn't shake, but something inside her tightened. Lucas Bennett watched her closely. He sat in the back as usual, leaning slightly to one side, one arm draped casually over the back of his chair. His expression didn't show amusement, not openly, but there was a quiet satisfaction in the way his eyes followed her movements. He wasn't the one holding the marker, but he had seen it happen, and he hadn't stopped it. Claire Donovan sat near the front, her posture perfect, her hands folded neatly on her desk. Her long blonde hair fell smoothly over her shoulders, and her expression remained composed, almost innocent. But there was a slight curve at the corner of her lips, something controlled, something intentional. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The next incident came before Alicia could prepare for it. It was early. The classroom was still empty when she arrived. She placed her bag down, set her materials on the desk, and sat. For a second, everything felt normal. Then, resistance. Her body didn't move the way it should. Her hand pressed against the desk as she tried to stand. The chair didn't come with her. Alicia froze. Slowly, realization set in. Glue. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the desk as she carefully pulled herself free, the fabric of her skirt tugging slightly before releasing. She stood still for a moment, her breath steady but controlled. She looked at the chair, then at the door. Whoever had done it knew she would be first in the room. This wasn't a random act. It was planned. When the students entered, the reaction was immediate. Whispers, stifled laughter, eyes watching her, not directly, but enough. Alicia said nothing. She began the lesson as if nothing had happened. But inside, something had shifted. This was no longer about adjustment. This was about endurance. Later that same day, the classroom door became the next stage. As Alicia stepped inside after a short break, a small container hidden above the doorframe tipped forward. Water spilled down instantly, soaking her shoulders, her hair, her clothes. This time, the laughter was louder, uncontained. Alicia stood still. Water dripped from the ends of her sleeves onto the floor. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes, not in defeat, in control. When she opened them again, her expression had changed. Not softer, not harsher. Clear. "Everyone sit down," she said. The room hesitated. Then slowly, the students obeyed. Her eyes moved across the room and stopped at Lucas. "Stand up." Lucas didn't move right away. He tilted his head slightly, as if considering whether to respond. Then he stood. "I didn't do anything," he said before she could speak. His tone wasn't defensive, it was practiced. Alicia stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. "You are part of this classroom," she said, "and right now, this classroom has a problem." Lucas held her gaze. For a second, something flickered in his expression. Then it disappeared. "You will stand for the rest of the lesson," Alicia continued, "and you will think about what kind of environment you're choosing to create." The room went quiet. Not completely, but enough. For the first time, the balance shifted. Slightly, but unmistakably. That afternoon, Alicia didn't go straight home. She stayed in the classroom, sitting at her desk long after the halls had emptied. The silence felt different now. Heavier. She stared at the board, at the rows of desks, at the space where everything had happened. And for the first time since arriving in Boston, doubt crept in. Not loud, not overwhelming. Just present. A knock at the door broke the silence. Alicia looked up. Emily Carter stood there. She hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. Up close, Emily looked even more uncertain than before. Her posture was slightly tense, her fingers gripping the edge of her notebook as if she needed something to hold on to. Her green eyes met Alicia's, then shifted briefly away before returning. "I saw what happened," Emily said quietly. Alicia didn't respond immediately. Emily took a small step forward. "This isn't normal," she continued, "and it's not okay." Her voice was soft, but there was something new in it, something firmer than before. Alicia studied her for a moment. "Then why doesn't anyone say anything?" she asked. Emily hesitated, because the answer wasn't simple. "People here," she began slowly, "they avoid conflict, especially when it's complicated." Alicia let out a quiet breath. "This isn't complicated," she said. Emily didn't disagree, but she didn't argue either. "I'll try to help," Emily said finally. It wasn't a promise, but it was something. That night, in a house far from the city's noise, Lucas Bennett sat across from his father again. Richard Bennett didn't look up from his phone as he spoke. "I received a message today," he said, "about your class." Lucas's shoulders stiffened slightly. "They're making a big deal out of nothing," he muttered. Richard placed his phone down slowly. "Listen to me carefully," he said, his voice calm but sharp. "You are not there to be influenced by someone who doesn't belong in that position." Lucas looked up. There it was. Clear. Direct. "You don't have to take her seriously," Richard continued. "Focus on what matters." Lucas nodded, but this time the response felt different. Less certain. Across town, in a quiet apartment, Alicia sat by the window. The city lights flickered outside, distant and cold. She thought about Redwood Valley, about Ethan, about her grandmother's hand trembling as she wrote her name. She closed her eyes. "They deserve better," she whispered. Then she opened them again and straightened her posture. Tomorrow would be harder, but she would still be there. The shift began quietly, but this time it didn't stay inside the classroom. Boston's sky had turned heavy that week, low clouds pressing down over the city as if something inevitable was about to unfold. The wind carried a sharp chill, and the sidewalks outside Brighton Academy were no longer just filled with students, but with parents. Waiting. Watching. Talking. Alicia Brooks noticed it before anyone said a word to her. The glances were different now, less subtle, more deliberate. Conversations stopped when she passed. Doors closed a second too quickly. Something had spread, and it was growing. Inside the school, the tension had taken on a new form. Formal, structured, dangerous. It started with a letter. Alicia found it waiting on her desk one morning, placed neatly at the center as if it had been measured. The envelope was crisp, official, bearing the school's insignia. Her name was printed clearly. Inside, the words were colder than she expected. A formal complaint, filed by multiple parents. Allegations of inappropriate disciplinary behavior. Claims of public humiliation of a student. Concerns about professional conduct. At the bottom, a list of signatures, more than a few. Alicia's fingers tightened slightly around the paper. For a moment, the classroom blurred. Not physically, but emotionally. As if everything she had endured had suddenly been rewritten into something unrecognizable. She lowered the paper slowly. This wasn't about misunderstanding anymore. This was escalation. Later that day, she was called into the principal's office. Mr. Howard sat behind his desk, his posture straight, his expression carefully neutral. He was a man in his late 50s with thinning gray hair and a face that had learned how to remain composed under pressure. His voice was always measured, never raised, but it carried a quiet authority that often replaced action with restraint. "Alicia," he said, folding his hands together. "Please have a seat." She remained standing for a moment, then slowly sat down. Mr. Howard sighed lightly, as if the situation had been inconvenient rather than urgent. "There have been complaints," he continued, "from several parents. They are concerned." "Concerned about what?" Alicia asked, her voice calm but firm. Mr. Howard hesitated. "Your methods," he replied. "Specifically, your handling of a student, Lucas Bennett." Alicia held his gaze. "He was disrupting the class," she said. "I addressed it. Publicly," Mr. Howard added, "he was part of a public disruption." Mr. Howard leaned back slightly. "The parents see it differently." A pause, then, "They are considering legal action." The words settled heavily in the room. Alicia didn't respond immediately, not because she didn't understand, but because she did. Perfectly. The news spread quickly, faster than truth ever could. By the end of the week, the situation had moved beyond the school's control. A formal lawsuit was filed. The accusation was simple: that Alicia Brooks had humiliated a student in front of his peers, that she had crossed a line, that she was unfit. Emily Carter sat at her desk that night, staring at the email notification glowing on her screen. She had been asked to provide a statement, a neutral account. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Emily's reflection stared back at her from the dark screen. Uncertain, conflicted. She had always been someone who avoided confrontation, someone who chose quiet observation over involvement. But this wasn't something she could ignore. She had seen everything. The whispers, the setups, the pattern. Her chest tightened slightly. She began typing, then stopped, because just hours earlier, she had been called into Mr. Howard's office as well. "We need to handle this carefully," he had said. "The school's reputation is at stake." Emily knew what that meant. Stay neutral, say less. Do not complicate things. She looked back at the screen, at the blank document, and for the first time, her silence felt heavier than speaking. Across the city, Daniel Reed read the headline twice. He was 28, a young journalist working for a local news outlet, still early in his career, but driven by something deeper than ambition. Daniel had a lean build, slightly unkempt dark hair, and a habit of rubbing the back of his neck when thinking. His brown eyes were sharp, observant, always searching for the story behind the story. "A teacher under fire," the article read. He frowned. Something about it felt incomplete, too clean, too one-sided. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen lightly against the desk. "People don't usually become problems overnight," he muttered to himself. He opened a new file and began taking notes. The courtroom was colder than Alicia expected, not physically, emotionally. Everything inside was structured. Polished wood, high ceilings, rows of seats filled with quiet observers. The air carried a weight of judgment long before any words were spoken. At the center sat Judge Richard Collins. He was a man in his early 60s, tall even when seated, with a rigid posture that reflected years of authority. His silver-gray hair was neatly combed back, and his sharp blue-gray eyes carried a strict, no-nonsense demeanor. His face showed little emotion, not out of indifference, but out of habit. A man who believed control meant fairness, or at least that's what it looked like. Alicia stood alone. No familiar faces beside her. No support. Just the echo of everything that had led her here. When she spoke, her voice was steady. She explained the classroom, the behavior, the escalation, the attempts to maintain order. But as she spoke, she noticed something. The judge wasn't asking questions, not the ones that mattered. Instead, the focus remained narrow, controlled, on her. "Did you ask the student to stand in front of the class?" Judge Collins asked. "Yes," Alicia replied. "And did you address his behavior publicly?" "Yes, because that will be enough." The interruption was sharp. Final. Alicia paused. Something inside her tightened. "He was not the only one involved," she said, her voice firm now. "The classroom environment—" "This is not about the classroom," the judge cut in. "This is about your conduct." Silence filled the room. Not neutral. Weighted. Alicia's hands remained still at her sides, but her chest rose slightly as she took a breath. "They set me up," she said. The words were quiet, but clear. A murmur moved through the room. Judge Collins's expression didn't change. "Do you have proof of that?" he asked. Alicia didn't answer. Because she didn't. Not in a way that mattered here. In the back row, Lucas Bennett sat beside his father. His posture was stiff, his usual confidence replaced by something less certain. His eyes moved between Alicia and the judge, his jaw tight. This wasn't what he expected. This wasn't supposed to go this far. He shifted slightly in his seat. Richard Bennett leaned forward, his expression unchanged, his presence firm. "Stay focused," he whispered. Lucas didn't respond, because for the first time, he wasn't sure what focused meant anymore. The decision came quickly. Too quickly. Judge Collins adjusted his glasses slightly before speaking. "Based on the information presented," he said, his voice firm and controlled, This court finds that Miss Brooks demonstrated unprofessional conduct in her handling of the student. Alicia stood still. The words landed, but they didn't surprise her. This behavior, the judge continued, is not aligned with the standards expected within an educational environment. A pause. Then, termination of employment is recommended. Recommended. But everyone in the room knew what that meant. Final. Alicia didn't speak. Not because she had nothing to say, but because nothing she said had changed anything. As she walked out of the courtroom, the city felt different. Colder. Larger. Further away, behind her, the system had made its decision. Ahead of her, there was nothing. Not yet. The mornings in Redwood Valley began to change, not all at once, but in small, almost unnoticeable ways. The air was warmer now, carrying the scent of earth and wood, and the sunlight stretched longer across the dusty yard beside Alicia Brooks' home. Where there had once been silence, there were now voices. Soft at first, then growing stronger with each passing day. The small shelter beside the house no longer looked abandoned. It had become something else, a classroom, not a perfect one, not even a proper one. The wooden roof still sagged slightly, and the floor was uneven dirt packed down by years of neglect. But the space had been cleared, repaired where it could be, and filled with something it had never held before. Purpose. Marcus Hill stood near the entrance one morning, wiping his hands on a worn cloth as he stepped back to look at what they had built. He had reinforced the weak beams with spare wood from the workshop, hammered loose nails back into place, and even managed to create a longer bench using old planks that no one else had needed. It wasn't polished, but it was strong. "You're going to need more space soon," he said, glancing toward the growing number of children walking up the dirt path. Alicia followed his gaze. There were more of them now, children of different ages, some barefoot, some carrying old notebooks, others with nothing but curiosity in their eyes. "We'll make space," she said quietly. Marcus nodded. He believed her. Inside the shelter, the class had already begun. Alicia stood in front of the wooden board, a piece of chalk in her hand, her posture steady, her voice calm. The hesitation that had once followed her from Boston had begun to fade. Not completely, but enough. She was different here. Stronger. Not because things were easier, but because they mattered more. "Let's read this together," she said, writing slowly across the board. The sentence was simple, but for the children sitting in front of her, it was a challenge. Ethan Carter sat in the front now. He had changed. Not just physically, though he was taller, his posture more upright, but in the way he focused. His eyes no longer avoided the words. They followed them, carefully, determined. "Try," Alicia encouraged gently. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his lips moving as he traced the letters with his finger. "I can see," he began, his voice quiet but steady. He paused, then continued. "The road." The sentence wasn't perfect, but it was complete. Ethan looked up. For a second, he didn't smile. He just stared, as if trying to understand what had just happened. Then, a small, disbelieving laugh escaped him. "I read it," he said. Alicia nodded. "Yes," she replied softly. "You did." Around him, the other children leaned in closer, their eyes wide, their attention sharper than before. Something had shifted, not just in Ethan, in all of them. Grandma Lillian sat near the side of the shelter, watching. She didn't sit with the children. Not at first, she had insisted on that. "These lessons are for them," she had said. But Alicia knew better. So one afternoon she brought a chair closer. "Sit here," Alicia told her. Lillian hesitated. Then, slowly she moved. Her hands were still slightly unsteady, her movements careful, but her eyes held that same quiet determination Alicia had seen years ago. Alicia handed her a piece of chalk. "Let's try again," she said. Lillian smiled faintly. Her fingers curled around the chalk, gripping it tighter than necessary, as if afraid it might slip away. Slowly she began, L? Her hand trembled slightly. I... The line curved unevenly. L. A pause. Then again. L. The children watched in silence. No laughter, no impatience, just attention. Nen? When she finished, Lillian stared at the board for a long moment. Then she turned slightly, looking at Alicia. It's still mine, she said softly. Alicia smiled. It always was. Word began to spread not through announcements or newspapers, but through people. Through conversations at small grocery stores, at roadside stops, at church gatherings. There's a teacher out there, they said. She's teaching for free. She's helping kids read. And slowly, more people came. Some children, some older, even a few adults standing at the edges, watching before deciding whether to step forward. One of them was Sarah Mitchell. Sarah was a woman in her early 40s, tall and slightly lean, with sun-worn skin and tired eyes that told stories of long days and little rest. Her hair, once dark, now carried streaks of gray, often tied back loosely as if she didn't have time to care about appearances. She worked at a small roadside diner, spending years serving others, rarely stopping for herself. She had never learned to read. Not properly. She stood at the edge of the shelter one afternoon, arms crossed, watching the lesson in silence. Alicia noticed her, but didn't call her out. After the class ended, Sarah stepped forward slowly. I'm too old for this, she said, her voice rough, but not unkind. Alicia shook her head. No, she replied, you're right on time. Sarah studied her for a moment, then nodded once, and sat down. The classroom grew, not in size but in meaning. The old wooden shelter was no longer just a place to learn letters. It had become a place where people changed, where silence turned into voices, where hesitation turned into effort, where names, once forgotten, were written slowly, carefully, with pride. That evening, Alicia sat on the porch again. But this time, the silence felt different. Behind her, the faint sound of children repeating words still echoed. Beside her, Lillian held a small piece of paper. Her name, written again. More steady this time. Marcus leaned against the railing, watching the sky fade into deep blue. You didn't lose anything, he said quietly. Alicia didn't respond immediately. She looked out at the road, at the place where it all began. Then she spoke. I think I just came back to where I was supposed to be. 3 years passed, not in sudden leaps, but in steady, quiet transformation. Redwood Valley no longer felt like a place standing still. The mornings carried a different energy now, voices rising earlier, footsteps gathering along the dirt path leading to Alicia Brooks' classroom. The old wooden shelter that once barely held a handful of children had expanded, not just in size but in spirit. The roof had been reinforced, the benches extended, and a second board, still rough, still handmade, stood beside the first, filled daily with words that once seemed unreachable. Alicia stood at the center of it all, no longer uncertain, no longer searching for where she belonged. She had become exactly what she once dreamed of. A teacher. Her presence had changed too. At 23, Alicia carried herself with a quiet strength shaped not by success, but by endurance. Her movements were more assured, her voice more grounded. The hesitation that once lingered in her tone had disappeared, replaced by something steady, something earned. In front of her, the children had changed even more. Ethan Carter, now a teenager, stood at the front of the class one morning, holding a piece of paper in his hands. He was taller, his posture no longer withdrawn, his voice clearer than it had ever been. His once hesitant eyes now carried focus, even confidence. "Read it out loud," Alicia encouraged. Ethan nodded. He began slowly, but without stopping. The words came together, sentence after sentence, no longer broken, no longer uncertain. When he finished, there was no silence. There was applause, not forced, not polite, real. Ethan looked down at the paper, then back at Alicia. "I didn't think I could do that," he said. Alicia smiled softly. "You always could," she replied. "You just needed someone to show you how." The classroom had grown beyond children. Adults now sat among them, some hesitant, some determined, all carrying their own reasons for being there. Sarah Mitchell was one of them. She no longer stood at the edge. She sat in the second row, her posture straighter than before, her hands steadier when she held a pen. The years of doubt hadn't disappeared, but they had softened. Her once guarded expression had been replaced with something quieter. Hope. One afternoon, she approached Alicia after class. "I read a menu today," she said. Her voice was simple, but the weight behind it was not. "I didn't have to ask anyone," she added. Alicia nodded. "That matters," she said. Sarah smiled faintly. "It does." The change in Redwood Valley did not go unnoticed. At first, it was local. Then, it moved beyond. A small news crew arrived one afternoon, their van kicking up dust as it pulled to a stop near the classroom. The man who stepped out first introduced himself as Thomas Green. He was in his mid-30s, average height with a lean build and a professional demeanor that suggested years of experience behind the camera. His dark hair was neatly styled, and his voice carried a calm clarity that made people listen. "We're doing a story," he said, "about education in rural communities." But when he saw the classroom, he paused, because this wasn't what he expected. Children reading aloud, adults writing carefully, a teacher standing in the middle of it, not with authority, but with purpose. "This is different," he said quietly. Alicia didn't respond. She simply continued teaching. The segment aired 2 weeks later. "The Teacher Who Changed a Village." The title spread faster than anyone anticipated. The video was shared, then reshared, then discussed. People watched not just because of the story, but because of the truth inside it. Children writing their names, adults learning for the first time, a woman who had been pushed out of one system, building something stronger outside of it. Miles away, in a small office filled with scattered papers and dim overhead light, Daniel Reed watched the video in silence. He didn't react immediately. He simply replayed it, then again and again, because something in it connected to something he had seen before. The name. Alicia Brooks. He leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed slightly. "That case," he murmured. 3 years ago. A lawsuit. A teacher dismissed. The details had never felt complete. And now, they felt wrong. Daniel reached for his notebook, flipping through old entries, finding the file he had never closed. He began writing again, this time with purpose. Across the country, in a quiet apartment, Emily Carter sat at her desk, the glow of her laptop illuminating her face. She had watched the same video. Her fingers rested still on the keyboard. 3 years, and the memory had not faded. She remembered the classroom, the silence, the things she hadn't said. Her chest tightened slightly, then she opened a folder. Inside were documents she had kept, copies of reports, internal emails, notes she had written but never submitted. Proof, not complete but enough to matter. Emily hesitated, then she began typing. An email. Recipient, Daniel Reed. Subject, "You're missing part of the story." She paused before sending, then clicked. That same week, a letter arrived in Redwood Valley. It wasn't official. It wasn't formal. The handwriting was uneven, but careful. Alicia recognized the name immediately. Lucas Bennett. She opened it slowly. The words inside were simple. "I didn't understand what I was doing back then. I thought I was just following along, but I wasn't. I made it worse. And I'm sorry. You didn't deserve what happened. I hope you're still teaching. Because you were right about all of it." Alicia read it twice, then folded it carefully, not with anger, not even with sadness, but with something quieter. Closure. That evening, the classroom was empty. The sunlight faded slowly across the wooden boards, casting long shadows that stretched toward the door. Alicia stood alone for a moment, looking at the space, at the words written on the board, at the place where everything had started again. 3 years ago, she had lost everything. Or so she thought. Now, she understood. She hadn't lost anything. She had found where it truly mattered. The call came on a quiet afternoon, carried through a signal that crackled slightly before settling into clarity. Alicia Brooks stood just outside the classroom, the late sunlight warming the wooden boards beneath her feet, when Marcus handed her the phone. "You might want to take this," he said. Alicia took it, her expression calm but curious. "Miss Brooks?" a voice asked from the other end. It was professional, measured, but there was something beneath it. Urgency. "Yes, this is Alicia. This is Daniel Reed, I believe. We need to talk." A pause, not long, but enough to signal that everything was about to change. Boston had not forgotten. It had simply waited. The investigation Daniel began had not been loud or immediate. It moved carefully, piece by piece, following details others had ignored. Emails that didn't match official statements. Internal reports that were never submitted. Patterns in behavior that no one had questioned before. And then, Emily Carter's message. When Daniel opened her files, everything shifted. Emily had changed over the past 3 years. The quiet hesitation that once defined her had been replaced by something steadier, shaped by regret but driven by resolve. She had left Brighton Academy months earlier, unable to reconcile what she had witnessed with her own silence. Her posture was still gentle, her voice still soft, but her decisions were no longer uncertain. "I should have spoken sooner," she told Daniel when they met in person. Daniel shook his head. "You're speaking now. That's what matters." Together, they pieced it together. The setups, the coordination among students, the internal pressure within the school to avoid conflict, the narrative that had been shaped, not by truth, but by convenience. And finally, enough evidence to reopen the case. The courtroom looked the same, but this time the weight inside it had shifted. Judge Richard Collins sat at the front once again, his posture unchanged, his expression still composed, but the confidence that once filled the room now carried a faint tension beneath it. Because this time, he was not in control of the narrative. Alicia stood where she had stood before. But she was not the same person. She did not stand alone. Emily was there. Daniel sat among the press, and in the back row, Lucas Bennett, older now, quieter, watching. The evidence was presented carefully, methodically. Emails revealed how complaints had been encouraged rather than reported. Testimonies showed how classroom incidents had been manipulated, how responsibility had been redirected, and most importantly, the pattern. A consistent, deliberate effort to isolate Alicia, to undermine her, to remove her. Judge Collins listened this time, not because he had changed, but because he had no choice. When Alicia spoke, she did not raise her voice. She did not argue. She simply told the truth, and for the first time, the room listened. The decision came slower than before, deliberate, measured. Based on the newly presented evidence, Judge Collins stated, his voice steady but noticeably more restrained. This court recognizes that Miss Brooks was subjected to unfair treatment and a misrepresentation of events. A pause. Then, the previous ruling is hereby overturned. A murmur spread through the room. This court acknowledges that Miss Brooks acted within her professional capacity, and that the actions taken against her were unjust. The words settled differently this time, not as an ending, but as a correction. The apology came days later. Public. Unavoidable. Parents who had once signed their names against her now stood before cameras, their voices less certain, their expressions controlled but uneasy. Judge Collins himself appeared in a formal statement, his tone careful, acknowledging an error in judgment. But Alicia did not watch it. She didn't need to. An offer followed. Brighton Academy reached out. their message formal but softened by the weight of public attention. A position reinstated, with recognition, with compensation, with everything they had taken, returned. Marcus read the letter once, then handed it back to her. "Well?" he asked. Alicia looked at it quietly, then folded it. "I'm not going back," she said. Marcus nodded. He had expected that. Redwood Valley had changed too. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. The old shelter had been replaced. In its place now stood a small but solid building. Clean walls, proper windows, real desks. The result of donations that followed the story of people who had seen what Alicia built and chose to support it. It wasn't large, but it was real. Inside, the classroom was full. Children sat at desks, writing, reading, learning, and among them, Grandma Lillian. Her movements were slower now, her body more fragile, but her eyes remained as steady as ever. She sat near the front, a pencil in her hand, her focus unwavering. Alicia stood beside her. "Show me," she said gently. Lillian smiled. Her hand moved slowly, carefully, letter by letter. Her name, this time, clear, complete. She looked up at Alicia, her eyes shining softly. "I can write it," she said. Alicia nodded, her voice quiet. "Yes, you can." Lillian leaned back slightly, a peaceful expression settling over her face. For the first time, there was nothing left undone. Emily arrived in Redwood Valley weeks later. She stepped out of a small car, her posture still slightly reserved, but her expression more certain than it had ever been. She looked around at the school, at the children, at Alicia. "I was hoping you might need another teacher," she said. Alicia smiled. "We always do. Lucas came too. Not immediately, not easily, but he came. He stood at the edge of the classroom one afternoon, taller, quieter, carrying none of the confidence he once used as armor. 'I want to help,' he said." Alicia studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Then start by listening," she replied. And he did. Daniel Reed returned one last time. Not as a reporter, but as a storyteller. His book took months to complete, each page shaped carefully, each detail grounded in truth. When it was finished, the title was simple: The Name They Can Write. One evening, as the sun dipped low over Redwood Valley, Alicia stood at the doorway of the classroom. The voices inside were steady, confident, names being spoken, names being written, names being owned. Marcus stood beside her, arms crossed, watching quietly. "You changed something," he said. Alicia shook her head slightly. "I didn't change anything," she replied. She looked inside, at the children, at the words on the board, at the life that had grown from something so small. "I just started something." She paused, then added softly, "It doesn't take a big dream to change the world." Her voice settled into the space around her. Sometimes just teaching someone to write their name is enough. This story reminds us that not all dreams need to be grand to matter. Sometimes a small dream like helping someone read or write their own name can carry a meaning greater than anything else. In everyday life, we often chase big goals and forget that the smallest acts of kindness and patience can create lasting change. It also teaches us about perseverance. Life is not always fair. There will be moments when your effort is misunderstood, when your intentions are judged, and when doors are closed without reason. But giving up is not the answer. What defines us is the courage to continue, even when no one is watching, even when no one believes in us. Education is one of the most powerful tools we have. It is not just about knowledge, but about dignity, confidence, and identity. Being able to read, to write, to understand the world around us is something many take for granted, but for others, it is life-changing. This story reminds us to value learning and to help others access it whenever we can. Sometimes, recognition comes late. Sometimes, the truth takes time to be seen, but that does not mean it loses its value. What is right will always matter, even if the world takes time to acknowledge it. So today, ask yourself a simple question. Who around you needs encouragement, guidance, or a second chance? Your words, your actions, your patience could be the turning point in someone's life. If this story meant something to you, please share it with others so its message can reach further. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what lessons stayed with you the most. If you believe in stories that inspire change and remind us of what truly matters, consider subscribing to the channel. May God bless you, protect your path, and give you strength to keep going even in difficult times. May you become a light in someone else's life, just as this story has shown us. If you believe in kindness, perseverance, and the power of small dreams, type Amen in the comments.